Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's been a busy week. This week we have 3 trainings, so thank you for joining, and thank you for our trainers, Claire and Johnny, for joining us again. And today is the third and last session on preprints in level 1, of course. We'll still have more on preprints in level 2. And today with us is Clare Stone, and Claire is actually an editor have been working as an editor for over 15 years. And she's been focusing on genomics and then transitioned to medicine. She has a very strong interest in open access and preprints, and she's currently the medical editor at SSRN in Elsevier. Actually, Claire also contributes to research integrity, policies, and initiatives. And in her free time, she enjoys walking with her 2 dogs. So we're really happy to see you, Claire, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and I hope you can all hear me okay. Just shout if not. I have had some issues recently with my laptop and my audio. I'm waiting for my new laptop to arrive. Okay, so let's kick off. Thanks, Johnny, for inviting me to talk about the pros and cons of preprints. I should warn you, I think there's more pros than cons, but let's push on. Yeah. So I work at SSRN, and you probably haven't heard of it. It's I don't know why, but not so many people have heard of it. SSRN is a preprint server which was acquired by Elsevier a number of years ago. It initially started out as a social science network, but we now cover all areas, and we post preprints, as I said, from all areas. There's over 1 million papers on SSRN now, and we get over 100,000 papers every year. My area of expertise, if you can call it that, is medical papers. So my background was I was the editor of genome biology for about 5 years, and then I went to PLOS Medicine and was the editor at PLOS Medicine for about 7 years. So I would say that my experience is medical now. I moved to SSRN during the pandemic when they were getting a lot of COVID preprints, and they really needed some form of screening. And as we'll talk about through this session, COVID really changed preprints. I should also sort of warn you that because my background is medical, there's going to be a bit of a sort of life sciences medical focus on this talks, but you're mostly life scientists, I think, so I think maybe I'm in good company. So SSRN has had 24 million downloads in the last month for all of our papers, and over 827,000 authors. So SSRN was launched in 1994, and initially it was a social science network, hence SSRN, Research Network. It focused on law and finance and other social sciences and humanities, and that core area is still very strong at SSRN, and there are a lot of law professors who submit to SSRN and are very loyal to SSRN. And then in 2016, Elsevier acquired SSRN, and then we started adding more areas. This is because we have a policy now with Elsevier where we take submissions from their journals. And so when you submit to a journal at Elsevier, you'll be given the option of having your paper transferred over to SSRN to be posted as a preprint. In 2017, we expanded even further into biology. And so we take now the preprints for Cell Press, and I'm sure many of you have heard of Cell Press. That's a very good life sciences journal. And we call that Cell Press Sneak Peeks. And then in 2018, we launched preprints with the Lancet. So we host preprints from the journal The Lancet. We post about 250 of those a month. So it's a very successful program for us and for the Lancet. And so you can see from this slide, we cover all areas. So I'm just going to do a very, very, very brief overview of what preprints are. I know John has covered this, but essentially, if you look at this slide on the left, you've got the researcher and they write a paper, and we can call this a preprint, and this can then get posted to a preprint server. Now, you can see from the dotted drop-down yellow that not all preprints are submitted to a journal after being posted. In fact, preprints can either be just submitted to a preprint server and have nothing to do with any journal submission at all. It can just happen as an independent process if that's what the author wants to do, or you can submit to a journal and then you can choose then to have it submitted to a preprint server, or in fact the other way around. You can submit to a preprint server, and some preprint servers now have the option to go to journals. It's kind of a two-way street. But if you do submit to a journal, then it goes to peer review, and then the editors write to you and say, can you revise this manuscript? Can you do these edits? And that usually involves edits that the editor wants, as well as some edits that peer reviewers want as well. And then you submit the article back to the journal, and hopefully at this point it gets accepted. And then after the author's manuscript, or after the manuscript is accepted, then you get copy editing and typesetting, and ultimately the article is published. And so the great thing about preprint servers, which you can see here in this red box, is that all of this completely shortcuts this process here, which can be quite a long period of time. It can be sort of, I don't know, it can be quick, it can be sort of 3 months depending on the journal, but it can be up to a year. And when you have a preprint, then it's immediately out there and it's open then for reading and commenting. It can be cited as well, which is a great thing that's sort of come out in the last few years. And so this then becomes, part of a discussion within the research community and your particular area of interest. So preprints are early versions of research papers. They're shared ahead of the formal peer review of what happens at journals, and they provide key benefits to researchers. So this is what a journal, so when you go into a journal and you're submitting your paper, you upload your Word document and you upload your figure documents and you add all the information about the authors and the affiliations that you have, all of that regular stuff. And then many journals have what we call the option now to select your paper to become a preprint. And this is what it looks like at Elsevier journals. And so if you tick this yes box here, then it immediately comes over to SSRN, and it's posted immediately if it's a life sciences or a not medical paper. And you can say, no, you don't want to share it as a preprint, and then it's not shared. The option is completely yours. So as I said, we've had a lot of success with some life science and medical journals. So we have Cell Press Sneak Peek. So you can see here that we've got nearly 10,000 papers on Cell Press. And you can see here that here's a paper we've just posted. It shows here that it's under review. So you know that this paper's been submitted to Cell Press, but it hasn't been published yet, but you can still read it ahead of it being published. And preprints with the Lancet, as I said, this is really a success story for us. So this is 17,000 papers here so far, with over 160,000 authors, and a lot of papers in preprints with the Lancet have really helped transform the view, if you like, of preprints during the COVID pandemic. Or do I mean the other way around? Anyway, you get what I mean, I'm sure. We also have many other journals we take submissions from, and one of them is Scientific African, and this takes papers from all areas. And maybe you could have a look at this. We launched this about a year ago, I'd say, so still quite early on, with 154 papers specifically from African research, but we are really hoping this grows. So journal integrated preprint servers are really gaining traction. So in the past, you would just submit to a preprint server and then you might separately submit to a journal. Now, in many, many cases, the process is completely integrated and as one. And as I said, it can work from both directions. It can work from the you submit to a journal, and then the journal facilitates the transfer to a preprint server, or it can work the other way around, that you submit to a preprint server and the preprint server has an arrangement with a journal. So most of the big publishers now have arrangements like this. So Nature Publishing Group works with Research Square, Elsevier works with SSRN, and PLOS, along with many other publishers, works with bioRxiv and medRxiv, which are some very big preprint servers. And just to show you the scale of this, so at Elsevier, including our premier journals such as The Lancet, when an author submits, in 30% of cases they send their papers to SSRN. So it's so the preprint landscape and scholarly record and literature is a lot of it is tied in with the journal publishing process, even though it's very distinct. And it is, I don't want to just batter you all with SSRN. So this is an example of the Research Square page. And actually, I spoke to Michelle, who was the head of editorial at Research Square before she moved. And she said that her opt-in rate was around 30% from Nature journals as well. So I think it's probably, we can say, around about that across the board. And you can see here at Research Square, they've got papers from scientific reports, from BMC journals here, from Nature journals. And if you click on to the different areas, you can search for all preprints in different areas. And so I think that it's a great way to navigate. It's preprints in one place, and you can also navigate by what's been submitted to those journals. And again, as we saw with the ones at SSRN, it indicates that it's under review. So you know it hasn't been published yet, but you can still get in there and have a look at this paper. That's all a bit of background about sort of where we are with sort of preprints. And I was asked to talk about pros and cons. As I said, the pros list is a bit bigger than the cons list, which is, I take some comfort in this. So just whittling through some of these pros, and I know Johnny's talked about some of these as well, but let's go through them. So one of the biggest benefits is there's no wait times to publication. And I remember in the chat last week, someone commented that the peer review process for them had been very frustrating and taken a long time. And I think this is a common experience. And then even when the peer review is over, you have to do revisions. And some of those revisions might be actual doing additional lab work, which might take months. I've been in that position myself, and it can be very frustrating. It helps you to get your research out there into the community faster, and there's higher visibility. And there's been a couple of big studies looking at links to the number of citations with preprint servers, preprint papers, and it does look like there is higher social media coverage and visibility for papers that are preprinted. There's no paywalls, so you can read what you like without having that really frustrating thing come up where it's asking you to pay some money to read an article. It allows early career researchers to establish a body of work. So it used to be the case, certainly when I was in research, that if you're applying for a grant, you had to have a number of papers on your CV that were published in journals in order to have any chance of getting funding for your research. And that's difficult. It takes time to get those publications out. And so that's very difficult for a young early career researcher to achieve all of that at that early stage in their career. So it's great now that grant providers allow preprints to be used in grant applications. It means you can just get going a bit earlier on in your career. We can take some comfort from the fact that preprints do have quality control processes. Many preprint servers now have levels of screening in. So SSRN does, and bioRxiv and medRxiv do, and Research Square certainly do, and OSF even have announced in the last year that they are now starting to do screening and moderation of preprints. So I think this is another sort of great step forward for preprints, and a kind of a sort of way of providing quality control and sort of reassurance to the research communities. There's no APCs, so you don't have to pay money to have your preprint posted. As I said, you get more visibility, and it's also been shown that there's higher citation counts if you preprint your paper. Your article could be improved. Someone might say, I've seen your preprint and I don't know, I think that work is great. Have you thought about doing this control, or have you thought about using this different antibody or something? I think it might give you a good result, so that it can provide feedback that might be useful. And we also know that reviewers at journals can be biased. I was a journal editor. It can be extremely difficult to find reviewers for papers, and you tend to go back to the same reviewers. And so you end up with this sort of biased pool that are reviewing many of the papers in that area. So I think having this sort of open community feedback is really great. It's also a great place for negative results and unpublishable data, which sometimes journals aren't that keen on. And as I said, it can strengthen your research before journal submission. And for some journals submitted preprints, reviews and author comments and responses are visible in real time. So you remember we looked at that Research Square page, and they show you the under review page. If you click on those, for many of the Research Square papers, it actually shows who the reviewers are and what the review reports are, and you see all this before it's published. So it's really fantastic and sort of open process where you see who the reviewers are, what they're saying, what the author responses are. You can just really sort of track a manuscript in real time as to, you know, how it's changing through that process and journey. So coming back to the pros, so here's the sort of author value of a preprint and a case study. So this paper, which was submitted to SSRN in October 2020, discussed the anomaly or occurrence of the fact that many of the submissions that were submitted to Elsevier were underrepresentative of women during the COVID pandemic, and the same for peer reviewers as well. So why is it that women were not submitting papers and peer reviewing them during this period as to the extent they were before? And so this is quite an interesting topic and quite important, I think, as well. And so this paper was submitted, as I said, to SSRN in October 2020. It was then submitted to Nature and rejected, a desk reject within 24 hours. Then it was submitted to Science and rejected after 3 months, which I can imagine would have been extremely frustrating. Then it was submitted to Science Advances and rejected after 4 months. You can imagine the authors were very frustrated by now. Then it was submitted to Nature Communications and rejected after 2 months. Then it was submitted to PLOS One and accepted, and it was published a year after it was posted as a preprint. So you can imagine that what an incredibly frustrating process for these authors. Right. And so, as I said, preprints have really completely turned the medical field upside down. So when I was at Plus Medicine, preprints, when I first joined, preprints were anathema. It was like, oh my goodness, no, we can never have preprints because it's too dangerous. You have to have peer review happening around, particularly around anything medical, because of the potential for harm to the public through, I don't know, some medical message that hasn't been properly peer reviewed. But COVID completely changed that. And just a little sort of snapshot of 2020. We'll all remember it very clearly. I know I do. But so the first COVID preprint published was in bioRxiv, and that modeled the transmissibility of the virus, and that was in early January. And then there was the paper showing that the virus, SARS-CoV-2, can bind to the human ACE2 receptor. Then all of these, remember all those modeling studies that came out, and they were saying, they were basically indicating that we had to have lockdowns and how many people would die. And so they started to appear in about February. And then we had the infectiousness of SARS-CoV-2 peaking after 3 days, and then about the aerosol ability of SARS-CoV-2 to be transmitted. And then we had the dexamethasone paper in June 2020 in medRxiv. So this is a sort of snapshot of how preprints really sort of blazed a trail through the pandemic in giving us information that just would have been impossible to have in quickly if it had gone through the normal peer review process. And here's just the most wonderful example of how preprints were so important during the COVID pandemic. So we had this medRxiv paper here, which is showing that dexamethasone worked in hospitalized patients. Yeah, and this was the paper that showed that dexamethasone worked well in and reduced mortality in patients, those patients that had been put into induced coma and were mechanically ventilated. And it didn't show effects for patients that were just on oxygen. And this preprint was released in June 2020. The paper was published in New England Journal of Medicine in February 2021. So that's a long period of time when we were in a critical period. And if we think back as well, at that point in time, it's kind of hard to imagine sort of going back there, but we didn't know anything, did we? There were no drugs, there were no treatments, there was just no information. Doctors didn't know how to treat this. And so any paper like this could save lives was just incredibly important. So I thought it would be interesting to look at the discussion of these two papers. So the New England Journal of Medical discussion says that the recovery trial, so this is the trial about dexamethasone, provides evidence that treatment with dexamethasone at this dose once a day for 10 days reduces 28-day mortality in patients. This means that after 28 days, fewer patients have died. For those who are receiving respiratory support. They say they found no benefit among patients who didn't require oxygen. And the medRxiv discussion is almost identical. Basically, there's some stats here that probably the reviewer said, take those stats out. So given that there was a sort of 8-month lag, it's very interesting. And the only other big difference in the paper is that these two panels, B and D, are switched in order between the preprint and the peer-reviewed final version of the paper. And then just to sort of put this into context, this was released in March 2021, so a month after that New England Journal paper, but also now 9 months after the medRxiv paper. And it showed that this treatment had already at this stage saved over 1 million lives. So pretty powerful support for the justification for having preprints in the medical field. Preprints were and are still a significant part of COVID-19 research. So here the WHO in January 2020 announced that there was a public emergency. It was COVID. Then in March, they declare it's a pandemic. And this is the number of cases, and this is the number of deaths. And as we know, that death curve goes up. You can see that 40% of the journal articles along the same timeline, 40% of the literature out there is preprints. And that's a significant amount of research coming out on COVID in preprints. And you can see here that medRxiv led the way here with sort of SSRN and ResearchGate and Research Square following behind. Did I already talk about this one? I think I've talked about this one, haven't I? Yeah. So preprints, another pro, I've talked about COVID a lot here, but there's other sort of benefits to preprints. And as I mentioned, it helps with citations and social media attention. So there's been a couple of big studies at many articles. So this eLife one looking at nearly 75,000 articles, and it shows quite clearly that if you preprint your article, your paper rather, you get more citations and more attention really, and Altmetric scores. As I said, one of the other benefits is that grant providers are citing preprints and allowing preprints to be cited more, and that's moving forward quickly as well. So all Wellcome funded researchers are strongly encouraged to post preprints of their work under the CC BY license. And where there's a health crisis, they don't just encourage it, they require that a preprint is posted. They require that a preprint is posted. And further to this now, and just announced a few weeks ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have said that grant holders must make research available via a preprint, and it's going to actually stop paying article processing charges. Those article processing charges are what journals use and publishers use to support their business model. So, as I said, the other benefit of preprints is that it's not just work that's thrown out there in most instances. Preprint servers do take their responsibility seriously to make sure that the scholarly record is accurate and that, you know, just a whole load of junk isn't being chucked out there. So if you have, for example, at SSRN, a paper submitted and it's not medical, the team reviews it just to make sure it's a full PDF and that it's appropriate. So there are checks in place for some stuff that you may not want to have posted, like, I don't know, neo-Nazi stuff and other stuff that you really don't want up there. So we will filter out crazy stuff. And then the staff add a classification code. So they say, hey, this is a law paper, or hey, this is a geography paper. And then it's put into the right place in the browse page, and you can find it, and it's sent out by email or posted. And then if it's medical, we have more detailed checks, and medRxiv do this as well as Research Square on all medical papers. So medical papers, it's important that reporting standards are met. And so, for example, you will always have to provide for medical papers, SSRN and the other important preprint servers. You'll have to provide a conflict of interest statement for all authors. It's important that we know, for example, if your paper is on vaping, we need to know if you're supported by Philip Morris or British American Tobacco. We want a funding statement as well to say who funded this research. It's okay to say if no one funded it. And then if there's any patient data or patient information, we want an ethics approval statement. And if it's a clinical trial, we want a clinical trial registration number. And we do work with authors to make this very clear and say, hey, this is missing. Can you send this along? And then we also screen it just to make sure there's nothing too crazy there, that it's scientific, that the affiliations are correct, and that there's no doubt, there's no risk to public health and safety, because this is really important. And all papers at preprint servers that are medical generally have some notification on it like this. It says these papers should not be used for clinical decision making, blah, blah, blah. It hasn't been peer reviewed. This is a cautionary note that all preprint servers use for medical papers, just to provide an extra level of caution or warning to you so that you know it hasn't been through peer review. This doesn't mean to say the findings aren't reliable. Right, what's happening? Come on, move along. There we go. So coming back to the benefits, I don't want you to just trust what I say. Here's some author feedback on what our authors want or looking for in a preprint server. So this is an author survey we sent out, and we asked authors, what are you looking for? Why are you choosing to post your preprint? And 29% they want to share their research more quickly, and 26% says they want to share their research more widely, and 23% they say they want to increase the visibility of the work to lead to more collaboration and feedback and citations, and 12% said they want to establish the ownership of their research with a DOI. So a DOI is a digital identifier. It's a permanent identifier that's unique to that paper. And then 5% of people say, oh, I didn't realize I was posting my paper as a preprint. So we always have a small number of people who click the button to say, yes, transfer my paper, and they don't fully get what they're doing, or they change their mind. 1% say, I transfer my paper because my funder said I should do that. And then 4 is other reasons. So quite a lot of positive feedback as to why they're sharing their papers. And then we asked readers also, what are you looking for in a preprint? Why do you look for preprints? What are you looking to find or achieve? And 54% say they want to get access to early stage research, and 28% say they want to find a specific paper. And then 7% they want to look for a specific author's work. So I think there's a lot of interest in preprint servers, and readers are very open to looking at them to find the research they want. So here's I talked about a case study earlier about that paper, remember, about women who author papers less during the pandemic. And so we asked this author what was her perception of the value of the preprint. And she said that it gave early registration, and she got a DOI. So this is that digital identifier. She got early citations. She got 30 citations before the paper was even published. And if you remember, it was published a year later. So that's pretty good. It prevents scooping, and it means that she could claim that work as her own. It got disseminated and sort of circulated quickly. And proof of productivity in the interim with press coverage. And help the author show to their organizations and institutions that they were working on something, they were doing something, they were writing a paper and putting it together. So great feedback, I think, from that author, and I'm sure that these are kind of the views that most people have about preprints. So one of the other benefits, although you could take this paper as a slight negative, but there's been a couple of, so there was a huge study in PLOS One where the authors describe this method called preprint match. And what it does is identifies, it's a great tool, it identifies and links a preprint to the published article. And so once you have this tool, then you can do lots of analyses and say, hey, what happens to this preprint? How long does it take to get published? How many changes are in the published article versus the preprint? And this paper in Nature, the links are here, discusses the findings in this paper. And essentially the findings are that the study, which looked at 140,000 papers that were posted on bioRxiv and medRxiv, found that researchers in lower middle income countries had turned their preprints into peer-reviewed papers around 40% and 48% of the time. Whereas preprint authors in higher income nations were publishing these preprints about 61% of the time. So on the one hand, it's great that there's so many preprints from the low and lower middle income countries. It's disappointing that they can't all be, that the rate of conversion into a published article is lower. They did also find anecdotally that when they're published, preprints from lower to lower middle income countries made the transition to papers more quickly. So 178 days compared to 203 days for people from richer countries. I'm not sure why that is. And lower middle income preprints were altered more between the preprint and the final version than preprints from higher income countries. I don't know what we want to take from this. It's interesting, as I said, to look at. I think the point is that preprints can be a way of getting research out there when you may not necessarily have the money to pay for an APC. And this is what John Inglis says here, and he's the he works on bioRxiv, medRxiv, and he said that he also mentions that in lower middle income countries, perhaps editors may not be so familiar with preprints, and that they may think that then is a reason to reject the paper because they think it should be it's being published twice. And so I think there's a job we need to continue to do there about education about preprints, that they're not it's not publishing twice. A preprint is completely different to a published article. So we need to come on to the cons, and I said there were some. There's not many, but there are some. And I think most of them actually focus around COVID. But anyway, I'm sorry I've spent the whole talk talking about COVID. But anyway, so occasionally there's been public misrepresentation of research, and this happened a bit in COVID. Faulty research in preprints can be viewed before it's taken down. So because in many cases preprints are put up quickly, if there's a paper that's questionable, it's already there, and because it's already there, it's already then commented on and seized upon by people and appears on social media and then it sometimes gets taken down later. But it's a bit late sometimes. You kind of can't shut the door after the horse has already bolted. There is the potential for plagiarism of research results. It does occasionally happen. I think the flip side of this is that preprints allow you to assert your primacy on a paper or a topic. So the alternative, the flip side is that you can say, hey, I started working on this first. Preprint servers as well are pretty hot on plagiarism and take papers down or contact journals to say papers should be removed if they do see plagiarism. Double-blind peer review models are threatened by the author identity on preprint. So I'll talk about this specifically. It's not necessarily an issue that affects life sciences, but it does affect social sciences. So social science communities use double-blind peer review, where when a paper is sent to review, the name of the author is removed and the author and the name of the referee is not revealed either. So it's completely blinded. And then retracted journal articles do not always have the preprint taken down. There is, because there's so much literature out there, it's very difficult to always get crosstalk between journals and preprint servers exactly aligned. So let's come on to a couple of these points. So as I said, many of the sort of, well, not many of the downsides, so some of the sort of negative implications of preprints, if you like, have been around COVID research. So SSRN and preprints with the Lancet and many of the medical journals we handle, we still continue to receive COVID anti-vax papers. We used to get a lot. We used to spend sort of half the day sort of sifting these through. And it still takes a lot of time. It's become a bit more politicized recently. And so we still have to spend quite a lot of time looking at these and being very careful to make sure those don't get posted. Other paper trends that we've seen are papers around hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin. I should say about hydroxychloroquine, of course, before Johnny does, that this isn't just restricted to preprints, and I think that's enough. And then ivermectin, of course, there were a lot of papers about that, and a lot of preprints, and even the NIH sat on the fence about ivermectin during the COVID pandemic, which was really interesting because there were so many COVID preprints about this. The origin of the virus has been another big topic for misinformation around COVID, and we get a lot of papers still on the illegality of lockdowns. Again, that kind of is linked into kind of anti-government rhetoric. And then we have still a lot of papers that say that basically manipulate the statistics and numbers around deaths caused by COVID and say that in fact the deaths are caused by vaccination rather than virus. And you can see that even though this is just a really small number of papers compared to overall how many papers are out there that saved lives, remember dexamethasone saved 1 million lives, and that's just within the 9 months that the preprint was out. It still is something that gets seized on by anti-vax movements and conspiracy theory people. And so that is one sort of side effect, if you like, of preprints. It's not so much a negative, it's just a side effect. We've also had some really weird and wacky papers, as I'm sure all preprint servers have. Gargling with warm water apparently is extremely curative for COVID. So I wanted to talk briefly about conspiracy theories. So on Twitter, about 60% of the false claims about coronavirus still remain online. And I think this is sort of touching on the point that with preprint servers, once it's posted, even if it's taken down later, it's kind of already been out there. So one of the early preprints that came out on bioRxiv was about links and similarity between the coronavirus and the HIV genome. And this unfortunately drove lab leak conspiracy theories. And so you can see from this paper that here, this is taken from this paper, this link here, by the way. So essentially, this paper on the link between HIV and coronavirus got seized upon by scientists, who are these guys in blue, and they will have been presumably saying this is nonsense. They're completely different genomes, and the codon use we're seeing is not does not say the similarity. And then the conspiracy theorists are these guys here in yellow, and they're sort of out here, but they are not arguing the science. They're just saying, okay, this is because of a lab leak. So basically the preprint comes out, the scientists argue about the science of it, and the conspiracy theories use it as a way of driving their theories. And you can see here, here is that paper, the HIV coronavirus paper. The preprint came out here in February 2021, and here is the Google searches that happen. So it's not, you can see that you have a preprint that comes out. It's not always going to be the case that the the message of that preprint is restricted just to scientists. It's going to go, because these Google searches are massive and scientists don't just use Google searches. So this is the public using this and looking at these theories. So one of the other challenges of preprints, if you like, is preprint servers have there's obviously a lot out there, and I don't know how much you guys have heard about things like predatory publishers and paper mills, but that takes a lot of time, and we're seeing a lot of it come in. So we're seeing a lot of submissions that have been written by ChatGPT, which we don't post. And we see, because SSRN allows papers to be posted even if they're published somewhere else. So for example, we get quite a few papers from the journal Frontiers and from smaller society publishers that they're already published. And so people submit those papers to us. But it means also that we get papers come in from predatory publishers and paper mills. And these are essentially operations that are defrauding either editors or authors and conning them into thinking they get a genuine publication. And then also links to the published article is another research integrity issue. So as I said, the crosstalk between preprint servers and journals isn't always perfect. Takedowns and retractions, we see, again, it's not always easy to make sure that papers that are retracted at journals, and we expect like 1,000 this year at Elsevier. It's not always easy to make sure that the preprint is also taken down. So this sort of scholarly record isn't always accurate and reflecting these things. And then plagiarism, which we've already discussed. So the reason I mention this is that preprint servers don't have the resources that large publishers have to make sure that all of these research integrity issues are sort of tracked down and dealt with immediately before the papers are published. And so with preprint servers, you're working in sort of generally on a sort of smaller scale. So ILEN leads sort of the research integrity initiatives at SSRN, whereas at Elsevier, they have a team of 38 staff who handle this. So a big difference. So one of the questions is, should we expect preprint servers to have the same standards as journals? It's a question. Coming on to the issue of social sciences, which I said I'd touch on. Social science historically used what's called double-blind peer review, where the identity of the author and the reviewers is not known. Of course, if you have a preprint, then it's very easy for the reviewer to find the identity of the author. And so social science communities are quite hesitant about preprint servers, and we have a low uptake, for example, at Elsevier for social science journals for preprints because of this concern. We did, as I said, I worked at PLOS, and we did look at this, and we still found that reviewers would still participate in preprints, and they essentially went along with the spirit with which is intended, which is you decide that you won't actually look for the identity of the author. And, you know, if anyone wants to find out the identity of authors, they would anyway. You can find it on social media or conference abstracts or networking or grant applications. So I think the social sciences community will get there in the end. So just to go back over quickly the pros and cons, you can get your paper out more quickly. You haven't got to wait for peer review. There's no paywalls. You can just look at what you like, and there's not that annoying message asking for some money. It allows you to establish your body of work early, and this is because grant providers now allow you to use a preprint in your grant applications. You can take reassurance from the fact preprints do have quality control processes. There's no APCs. You do get more visibility and citations. You can get some feedback and commenting or even reviewers on your preprint paper. And in many instances, it allows you to just have your research out there earlier and get feedback on it. And the cons, again, just occasionally there's some public misrepresentation of research. As I said, this is not only restricted to preprints. I think it happens in journals too. I think there maybe some of those early COVID papers, there was maybe more instance of it in preprints on journals. I don't know. Johnny and I will have to have an argument about that. Let's see. So what's the future of preprints in my view? So they're here to stay and they're evolving really quickly, and the acceptance of them is really snowballing. I think things are still being iterated. There are lots of issues being discussed at the moment about things like peer review of preprints. This could be commenting or just even a thumbs up on a preprint, as in this looks good, or it can be a full, review of a preprint. And so I think preprints are here to stay. I think they are going to evolve so that they sort of challenge even more the journal model. It will be interesting to see how that changes in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. I suspect certain big name journals will always be here, but it'll be interesting to see how much preprints take on many of the sort of more mid-level journals, if you like. And the financial model for preprints is an interesting one that it will be interesting to see how that evolves as well, because of course there's no APC. So that's it, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. I haven't been looking at the chat either, sorry, so I'm not very good at multitasking. So if anyone wants to shout out, or Johnny, if there's anything in the chat that I need to answer, maybe we can talk about that.
I've been squirreling away responding to the chat. So just coming back to your point about the sketchy papers that we saw during this early part of COVID, I would probably agree and say they probably were more preprint based than paper based. And I think as we shift more research to preprint servers, that's where that problem will follow. It's a problem that plagues wherever the bulk of the research is, and it's a thing we all need to really hurry up and figure out how to fix.
Yeah, I think also COVID was just such a unique event. It was like fantastic for medical preprints in that it's turned fully turned the view round on that, but at the same time then you've just got some bad actors out there who just seize that opportunity and to just kind of to spoil it really a little bit. And I think the community stays very alert for these, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, I think given by the number of questions in the chat, I think you could definitely say that this was a very interesting and intriguing discussion. It sure made me think about a lot of stuff, and I've been writing notes down. So thank you very much, Stone, for this amazing talk, and especially that you gave the sort of proof, it was not just mentioning the pros and cons, but having actual proof of how these pros and cons act. And I would just like to refer back to one of the questions that was in the chat. It was by Paul. And his question was, does it mean that Elsevier and PLOS publish preprints free of charge? And you, Johnny, answered him that yes, the publication of the preprint is free, but I'm not sure, but I felt like he was asking that after the preprint, does this preprint, will it be published free or not? I'm not sure, Paul,
So,
if, yeah.
So preprints are free. There's no APCs. And I think maybe the confusion is that we probably shouldn't use the word publish, although I don't know if Johnny would want to debate that with me as well. Don't get into dangerous territory with these discussions with Johnny. But generally, preprints are regarded as posted. And if it's published, then that means it's a journal article. So I would say preprints are free to post. And then when you go to your journal submission, then there are APCs, but as Johnny mentioned last week, you can say that you want a waiver because you can't pay for the APC, and journal publishers have funds set aside to cover these APCs, and will allow, in most instances, that you don't pay to have your paper published. Those cases. All of this information is available on journal pages. If you sort of Google a journal and Google waivers, and you'll find out the information you need about that. But the preprint is, I don't know of any preprint server where you have to pay. So as far as I know, they're all free. Johnny probably knows more.
Yeah. I think you just answered the sort of the concern that I have about his question, is the confusion that posting the preprint is free, but then if it was like accepted for publication, then you have to either pay the fees for the publication or ask for a waiver. Yeah.
Yes,
so
that's right.
You should all
But
be
your
very
preprint is always there, remember? So, but
Yeah.
do ask for waivers.
Yeah, and you don't realize just how many conversations we all have amongst ourselves about the use of posting or publishing and the language we use. It's very
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I slip up all the time. And someone asked, what will happen to a preprint if a manuscript is rejected by a journal? That's an interesting question. So different preprint servers have different policies. So Research Square, for example, once a paper's posted, it stays up unless there's some really extenuating circumstance why a paper should come down. But SSRN and Preprints with the Lancet have a different view that the author owns the paper, and so if they want to take it down, we will take it down. And quite often this happens after the paper has been rejected by the journal, because if a paper is, for example, posted with Preprints with the Lancet, and then it gets published later in I don't know, New England Journal of Medicine, it's obvious to anyone then that it's been rejected by the Lancet. So sometimes that triggers people to ask if a preprint can be taken down. So, but otherwise, generally, a preprint can stay up. There's no reason why it can't stay up.
I think we have a raised hand. Banjo?
Thank you for this presentation on preprints. Series of questions. Number one, is it compulsory that you do your preprint with the journal you want to publish it with, if the journal has a preprint section?
Mm-hmm.
Number one. Number two.
Oh, go on, carry on.
Okay. Number two, between preprint and final publication, based on comments at preprint, can I edit my data? Number two. Number three, why do you think the rate of publication from preprint to full publication from low, medium income countries is low compared to the high income country, and what can we do about it? Thank you. Those are the three questions.
You might have to remind me of the question. So number one was, do you have to use the journal or the preprint server that the preprint server or the journal is associated with? And the answer is no. You can submit to whichever preprint server you want, and then you can still go and submit to whichever journal you want.
Okay, thank you.
And so, for example, at SSRN, we do take preprints from the journal submissions, but you can also just independently just submit through the SSRN website. You don't have to come through a journal submission, and then you can go and submit to a journal completely through their website as well. So that's can be completely separate, or it doesn't have to be separate. The third question, I'll answer that because I remember it. Why is the publication conversion rate lower in low and lower middle income countries? And I think it's because maybe there's a couple of things. I think it's perhaps because of the APC The article processing charge is a lot of money. You know, if you're publishing, if you're in a lab in a lower income country, you may not have enough money to pay APCs, and maybe you don't know about how to ask for waivers, and so maybe there's just not enough knowledge about asking for waivers and how to get those. Maybe that's one thing. And then maybe the other thing is, if it's small journals that where the editors aren't educated about preprints, maybe they think it's already been published. And one of the policies in journals is that you can't publish an article if it's already published somewhere else. And so maybe there's just a lack of education. A preprint is not a publication, if you remember. And what was your question to you? Sorry.
Question is, from preprints to final publication, can I edit my data?
Yeah. So when you have your preprint, if someone suggests you want to make an edit, then when you submit it to the journal, you could discuss that with the editor and say, someone suggested I make this change. Would it be okay to make that change? Because the editor will usually write to you anyway and say, make these changes. And you could say, I've received this feedback from a review on the preprints, and I want to make this change now. It's something that you could discuss with the editor, but yes, definitely you can make edits.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think especially the answer to the last question, I would really think that maybe it's the article processing fees that is sort of prohibitive for the authors, yeah, to sort of, which is sad. Yeah,
it's sad, but some of
Yeah.
the article processing charges are high, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
$3,000. And then if you want to have 10 papers a year, that's $30,000. That can employ, you know, maybe a couple of 1 or 2 positions in the lab. And so I can see that
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's a really tough choice to make.
Yeah.
But you need to remember to ask for waivers. And like Johnny said last week, for example, eLife, they don't even question waivers, they just give it to you. So, you know, do look on the journal's websites what waivers they have, and do make sure you ask about them.
Yeah, I think this is something important that maybe low and middle income countries, authors from these countries should be aware of, because I think most of them don't know really. Yeah. And I think we have a question from Muzi. Is there a difference in form between preprints and publication?
What do you mean by inform? So a preprint can just be a PDF with the name of the authors on, or a Word document. And a publication usually has the formatting and the house style that the journal wants, and some kind of branding that the journal puts on it. So does that answer that question?
Musi, could you tell us if this answers your question? Okay, I think it does, yeah, and yeah, because basically each journal has its own format that it would require you to put the publication in, but then in the preprint you don't really have to follow that format. And I think you even gave just a simple example of that, is that in one case the difference between the preprint and the final article is just like one of the charts have been flipped, like the numbering, the order of the chart. Yeah.
Sometimes they'll change slightly if the peer reviewers have said make these changes. So that's another change, yeah.
Yes, yes. I think first of all, Claire, we're taking longer. Do you have the time or?
I'm just checking actually if I can't remember if I have a meeting now.
Okay.
I can stay on a little longer if I've got to stay on for another 5 minutes or so, if that's helpful.
Okay. We have a question from Modester. Maybe we could finalize that, yeah.
Which could be better in terms of.
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't catch that question, sorry.
Modester, would you unmute?
Yeah, I have the question. Thank you. Modesta from Tanzania.
Could you
Having
speak
seen-
up? Yeah.
Having seen the many advantages of these preprints, but still, the universities, many universities are not accepting it as a part of the qualification when pursuing PhD. What would be the reason? That's my question. Thank you.
I still don't think I could hear that. It was very faint. Did
She said that even though preprints have so many advantages, but then many universities don't accept them. For example, if you're applying for a PhD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really frustrating, and I think again it's about education really, that if maybe you make a case to your university that, you know, if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, if preprints are good enough for them instead of research articles, then it's hard to understand how a university can insist that that's not good enough for them. I mean, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation fund a huge amount of research, millions and millions of dollars of research, you know, much in low-income countries, and it's hard to justify why, if it's good enough for them, it's not good enough for universities. So I think it's about education and maybe having focus groups within the university to discuss and educate about preprints.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
think,
difficult. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said is exactly what we're trying to do at AREN, is creating these communities and these focus groups. When you have one local network lead would go and educate the community, and then hoping this would snowball. So I think Modester and even Amino, this is on us. This is on us. We're the ones doing the research, and we're the ones who have to make the universities understand the importance of preprints. Yeah.
But there's many grant funding bodies. The NIH now allows preprints to be cited in grant applications. In fact, they insist on it. So I think it's really just education and just keep repeating this message.
Exactly. We have one more raised hand, but I'm not sure if you have the time, Claire.
I think one more, and then I'll have to sign off.
No worries. Okay, Musa, just please say your question quickly.
Okay, thank you very much for an interesting session. My question is why preprint is labeled with it is not to use for clinical decision. Like, is this statement to stay for a long, or is there any possibility to change, like as compared to a peer-reviewed journal?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Sorry.
Yeah, my question is, you have mentioned that preprints is labeled with this paper is not to be used for clinical decision. There is a label which says this for anybody who is going to read this paper, they have to read with a question as compared to a journal or peer-reviewed journal. And my question is why it is labeled with this statement. Is this statement is going to stay for a long period of time, or there is a change over course? Maybe that's my question.
So I think you're talking about the cautionary note saying the preprint hasn't been peer reviewed. So this is only on, as you say, clinical papers and medical papers. And it is important to have that there because it hasn't been peer reviewed and it hasn't been looked at by someone who's an expert in, I don't know, cardiology, drugs, or whatever it is. So it is important to have the cautionary note there. And and I think you said, does that change over time? So you wouldn't have that cautionary note on the publication, yeah, because it's already gone through peer review. So it's just something that appears on preprints. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think by this, we thank you very much, Claire, for this amazing talk and for staying 15 minutes more for the questions. Okay. And we hope to see you level 2. Yeah.
I've had a great time talking with you all, and I'm happy to help anytime. If you have any questions, just drop me an email. I'll put my email here. and happy to help in any way I can. Have a lovely day, and it's been lovely
You
talking to you
too.
all. And
Thank you.
good luck
Thank you,
with your
Claire.
research.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
Lamis, before we go, I think
Yeah.
with a question that was raised about why universities are not accepting preprints, I think last 2 years, AAU organized their open science, event, open science, bringing the equity to research and publishing, which I was lucky to be part of the organizers that kind of helped organize. I even presented at the event. And the idea was to get university higher level management to come and learn about the importance of open science, the fact that it brings equity to research and publishing and all that. And I was asking myself, I think I had a conversation with Lamesh that after all that event, I mean, what has been the outcomes? Have universities really adopted any policy in that sense? It's difficult because they are used to the systems that are there. I mean, it took years for universities to come up with the systems that they are using at the institution. So to kind of suddenly change, let's say, how they assess researchers and include the acceptance of preprints is going to take a lot of time. So although we have an organization like AAU pushing for this at that level, it still kind of hits a wall. And then we've had LibSense organizing a lot of events where they engage with this high level, representatives from institutions across Africa, and still the uptake of open science across is quite low, right? So it's going to take time, and that, like we said, that is one of the reasons why we are having this event where we would have people at the institutions kind of beginning conversations at that level to ensure that although it's difficult, we can begin that from the grassroots level and then bring it up. It's going to take time. That is the reality. I mean, when you tell them that preprints are great, that is not going to immediately get them accepted. But I mean, I think bit by bit with communities like ARIN and then collaborations with other organizations like AAU and LibSense, maybe we can see the changes that we want. So some of the high-level university management are aware of open science. They are aware of the benefits and etc. The question is how they will change the system and then the support in place to ensure that when they are changing it, they get all the kind of feedback and everything that they need to ensure the systems are well established. That is the difficult part, and hopefully we can help support in that regard. So yeah, it's going to take time. It's difficult, but it's going to take time. So let's hope that every one of us is able to contribute to that change here.
Yeah, and I think you guys being a part of this training, you because you haven't heard before of the importance of preprints, and this is what we want you to do, is to sort of spread this around your community. And yeah, I think bit by bit we will be able to be there, yeah, to reach our goals. So I think thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you everyone for joining, and yeah, hope to see you next Friday.
Thank